and a warm welcome everybody to this talk this afternoon. For most of my life, I've been conscious of the immense cultural significance of Glasgow Cathedral and what it contains and represents for Scotland as a whole, and Glasgow in particular. Now, today we're going to look at one particular aspect of the cathedral, and that is the examples of heraldry which survive within it. Some of it modern, as on the pew ends and in the windows, and how it narrates the legend of St Mungo, and how that legend is reflected in the heraldic achievement or coat of arms borne by the City of Glasgow to this day. The fundamental purpose of the medieval Glasgow Trust is to promote interest in and enjoyment of and enhance the medieval history and significance of Glasgow. And that includes what Glasgow and Glaswegians have achieved and are achieving from the earliest of times to date. Hopefully today's discussions will help to carry that forward. As a founding trustee of the Trust, I'm delighted to be joined today in this enterprise by the Right Honourable the Reverend Canon Dr. Joel Morrow, the Lord Lyon King of Arms, and by my co-trustee, the Reverend Mark Johnson, who is the Minister of Glasgow at the Cathedral. There is increasing speculation that in the buried heart of Glasgow lies a small Roman settlement, probably called Cathedral. Evidence about the site's potential Romanitas is gradually building up as more is known about the Roman roads and other settlements in the general area, and the remarkably regular alignment of some of the earliest streets in Glasgow, especially those round about the cathedral, such as the High Street, Castle Street, and the Dry Gate of Rotten Row, which is an unusual and regular layout for a medieval Scottish town. These last streets in particular, that is the Dry Gate and Rotten Row, have often been considered by some to be Roman in origin, and some have even thought that the general layout reflects the typical Roman streetscape of Arcado and Decumanus at its heart. Now, the Vita Kentigerne, or Life of St Mungo, narrates that the saint was driven to bury his mentor, St Fergus, at Cathedral in a cemetery dedicated by St Ninian of Whithorn. And it might or might not, according to one's point of view, be significant that in later times there was a pilgrim route between Glasgow and Whithorn. Mungo is generally reckoned to have been the first bishop of Glasgow. Evidence about his immediate successors is sparse, but one of them seems to have been called Magdalen, a variant of Maxen, and Maxen Wledig was the local name in Old Welsh, which was the other language besides Latin spoken in Britannia in these far-off times, for Magnus Maximus. And Magnus Maximus was a breakaway 4th century West Roman emperor who is recalled in poetry through a poem known as The Dream of Maxen Wledig. It still remains to be clarified how the settlement at Glasgow or Cathedral relates to that at Govan, whose church was founded some decades later than that of Kentigern by St Constantine, the King of Strathclyde. Now, there were a number of sub-Roman kings called Constantine, and the repeated use of this high imperial name does seem to point to a continuing awareness of late Roman or Byzantine imperial circumstances. Kentigern himself was the son of Thenu, a princess of the Votadini, the ruling tribe in Roman Lothian, who had strongholds on Traprain Law and the Castle Rock of Edinburgh, known alternatively as Dunedin and the Castrum Puellarum or Maiden's Castle. It was their later expulsion by the Angles of Northumbria to join their Cymry or companion patriots in what we now call Wales. It is narrated in another poem, now known as the Gododdin, which is reckoned to be the earliest surviving British work. And it might be worth knowing that the Cymru Islands, or the Isles of the Cymry, were so called by the invading Irish Scoti, whose Gaelic name Glasgow, probably meaning green hollow, became employed in place of Cathedral in the course of their invasion and settlement of this part of lowland Scotland. One of the first things to strike one upon entering any Presbyterian place of worship is the pulpit, with its Protestant focus upon preaching and expounding the Bible. The cathedral pulpit is believed to be one of the oldest surviving pieces of furniture within the building, and beyond it today lies a red carpet and scattered with various symbols.
One of the highlights of working within the cathedral is the opportunity to look at many of the really significant pieces of furniture and adornments that are present within the building. And one of those would be this carpet that's on the chancel. Now, carpets are quite significant in Glasgow, and that many of them have come from the Templeton Carpet Factory, which is at the east end of Glasgow Green, really just at the foot of the hill here at High Street. And I'm conscious when I look upon this carpet on the chancel that we quite quickly and easily have a representation of the crest of Glasgow and the symbols of Glasgow. And they tie in clearly with St Mungo. So when I look at it, it's interesting because most of the stories that were told about Mungo as a boy seem to involve a lot of bad luck for the poor chap and jealousy. Many of you will know that he was housed in Couros, and he was there within a kind of scholarly setting. But it's recorded that on one occasion, the boys were playing with a pet robin and they killed it accidentally, and the blame was put on Mungo. Mungo, however, and this is part of the miraculous behaviour of St Mungo, Mungo, however, took the bird in his hand, prayed, and the robin came back to life. You see, that's the first symbol in a sense that ties in with that nonsense verse, the bird that never sang, the tree that never grew, the fish that never swam, the bell that never rang. Another symbol, if we move from the bird, would be to the tree that never grew. Another time we're told that Mungo had left or been left in charge of the fire in the refectory, but he fell asleep. And either the fire went out of its own accord or it was put out by some of the boys that were there with Mungo. The story tells us that Mungo woke up, saw the dead fire, he broke off some frozen branches from a hazel tree, prayed, and rekindled the fire with these parts from the hazel tree. So again, the symbol, that's the bird that never flew, the tree that never grew. And then I suppose we come to the fish that never swam. And in many ways, I like to describe this as preserving a lady's honour. Now, many will know that King Roderick had, by the time of Mungo, established his home in what we would now call as Partick, near Glasgow. Now, his wife had foolishly given her ring to one of the knights on the court, suggesting that there was a liaison between them. But while out hunting one day, the king recognised the ring on the knight's finger and became rather suspicious. So that night, while the knight slept, he took the ring from the knight's finger and threw it into the river. When he returned home, he demanded the ring from his wife, and he threatened her with death if she could not produce it. The queen then appealed to the knight, who couldn't help because clearly it had been taken from his finger. So Mungo was summoned, and he was told the whole story. And again, this is this saving the lady's honour. He instructed a monk to fish in the river at the spot where the ring had been thrown in, telling him to bring back the first fish that he caught. Now, the monk, we're told, landed a salmon, great achievement for the River Clyde or the Mullen diner, as might have been. And when he brought the fish back to Mungo, he was told to cut it open, and the ring was found inside the fish's stomach. The messenger returned it to the queen, who was able to hand it back to her husband. Her honour was preserved and peace was restored. So that would tell us about the bird, tell us about the tree, tell us about the fish, and I suppose the bell is the only one that's left. It's probably during the time of Mungo, during one of his last visits, that when he went to Pope Gregory in Rome, he was given the gift, and he was given the gift of a bell, which was rung in the streets of the city as a summons to pray for the dead. So look at these symbols from the nonsense fairs. On this carpet, in many places emblazoned within the cathedral, this is the bird that never flew, the tree that never grew, the bell that never rang, and the fish that never swam. That's the correct order in which they appear when you actually look at the nonsense fairs, and maybe not in the way they're always on the carpet or the way that I myself have managed to represent them. But powerful symbols, significant symbols in Glasgow.
The symbols which Mark has just spoken about became from an early date the elements of the Glasgow City Arms, which seem at the beginning not to have been set out in any particular way, and that might in fact be a tie-in with the early beginnings of heraldry. Some people link the beginnings of heraldry with a late Roman illustrated government document called the Notitia Dignitatum, which displays the heraldic insignia of the principal settlements and command structures of the later Roman Empire, not long before its definitive sundering into the Western and Eastern, otherwise known nowadays as Byzantine, portions. That document predates only by 100 years or so St Ninian's alleged consecration of a graveyard at Cathedral, a pre-Gallic name for Glasgow, and where St Mungo was directed to take a cart with oxen, unguided in any way, to bury St Fergus underneath what is believed to be the site of the present building. All the above serves to illustrate the antiquity of Glasgow as a settlement, the antiquity of its church, and the antiquity of heraldry.
So there is that sense of the history of the cathedral. I like some of the openings that describe the beginnings of the cathedral. Joseph Robertson in Scottish Abbeys and Cathedrals, let me quote, he says, "Glasgow Cathedral stands upon a site which has been held sacred for more than 1,500 years. Here the cross was planted, and here was ground blessed for Christian burial by a Christian bishop, St Ninian AD 397. While Iona was yet an unknown island among the western waves, while the promontory of St Andrew was the haunt of the wild boar and the sea mew, and only the smoke of a few heathen wigwams ascended from the rock of Edinburgh." That was Joseph Robertson writing in Scottish Abbeys and Cathedrals. But underneath the floor of the cathedral is the burial place of St Mungo, apostle and bishop of the early Celtic Church, which we've heard of. While on the banks of the Morrow down there, the little stream which flows by the foot of the hill, the saint baptised his first converts to the Christian faith. The lower church was built during the episcopate of Bishop William de Boddington, who was 1233 to 1258. And it was designed by some unknown architect. Must have been some genius, though. The lower church is often miscalled the crypt, and is a particularly fine example of the first pointed style of Gothic, and is one of the chief glories of medieval Scottish architecture, with its 27 lancet windows, its galaxy of pillars symmetrically disposed yet skillfully varied in design, its mystery of light and shadow. Some would say it's a forest of carved stone. And its length is 123 feet 3 inches, and its breadth is 61 feet 8 inches. In the centre, and on the slightly raised platform, and within 4 slender pillars, stands the tomb of St Mungo, patron saint of Glasgow, in honour of whom the cathedral is dedicated. So here in 603, we believe the saint was buried. To this sacred spot, thousands of pilgrims made their way in medieval times. Indeed, in 1451, the Pope decreed that it should be esteemed as meritorious to make a pilgrimage to Glasgow Cathedral as to Rome itself. So quite a significant beginning in many ways for the cathedral here. And therefore, it's wholly appropriate to see its origins and its beginnings in some way or other.
Now, you might well wonder how the Bishop of Glasgow could afford to undertake buildings on this scale. but his diocese was absolutely immense. Its northern boundary probably stretched from a marker known as the Stone of the Britons in the shadow of Ben Lomond on the north side of the Clyde to Ancram in the east, where the medieval bishops had a defensible palace, and at least as far south into what is now England as the Rear Cross near Penrith. And that too is a Gaelic name whose Pen element recalls the idea of a boundary, as in the Pentland Firth and the Pentland Hills. This was probably the extent of the Brittonic or native kingdom of Cambria, otherwise Strathclyde, whose northern capital at Dumbarton, the fort of the Britons, was sacked by the Vikings in 870 AD. And it may have been at that time that the ecclesiastical centre of that kingdom moved to Govan, a place of far more importance than Glasgow, up until the Glasgow bishopric was refounded in the early 1100s by Prince David of Cumbria, before he became the King of Scots as King David I.
Scots heraldry is often called the Garden of Scottish history. And if we walk through parts of Glasgow, and in particular Glasgow Cathedral, you'll be surrounded with the stories that are illustrated in our history through the beautiful coats of arms that are depicted. For example, on the ceiling of Glasgow Cathedral, or in the vibrant colours that make up the stained glass windows. They tell the stories of individuals and organisations, and it tells the story from their own time, represented in symbols and in signs. Heraldry is all around us in Glasgow as we celebrate this festival. It's an alleluia of colours, telling stories of those who have gone before us, but also symbols of how we celebrate today. Signs and symbols have been used by men and women from the beginning of time to represent more than simply what they show. The development of Western heraldry is a matter of much discussion, and it's often said that it emerged out of the need to be seen in battle or in tournament. But it also emerged from the great traditions of symbols that represented more than themselves. It emerged in a way that it gave us an understanding of people's lives and their backgrounds, and the history of what they may have done or where they'd come from. To understand symbols is one of the fundamental parts of understanding humanity, because it's about telling the story in our own age. It is out of this usage that heraldry emerged, as a system of identification and honour, regulating the signs and symbols and their meanings and the colours as they are blended together as part of that history. Many of you will have followed the idea that heraldry, signs and symbols and colours was something that came out of the ideas of battle and tournament. And no doubt the art and science of heraldry did have a root there, but it also emerged from the Dark Ages as a system of identification and honour, represented in the symbols and charges of the lives of those who bore the arms.
Now, we have touched upon the grant of a barony to the Bishop of Glasgow, and the actual barony of Glasgow was much smaller than the diocese, but within the barony of Glasgow, the superior had the right to hold a baronial court, and all the major feudatories or principal vassals had a duty to attend that court and take part in its deliberations and hear what the superior had in store for the next period. the bishop, as superior of the borough, had very considerable secular as well as religious authority and jurisdiction. Now, the bishop's castle is now just a ruin and a few foundations underneath the St Mungo Museum of Religious Life and Art, but it was the principal place or caput of the barony of Glasgow, where the bishop as feudal superior will have held the baronial court, and in due course the council of the borough he was allowed to establish there. Quite apart from the baronial court, there was the ecclesiastical court, governed by an official appointed by the bishop, known as, in fact, the official. And the jurisdiction of the ecclesiastical court was quite substantial, far more than one might think today, because it dealt entirely with matters of good faith. And that included not just marriage contracts and every other sort of contract as well, but wills and testaments and a certain amount of crime. Because in those days, the church was entitled to judge the criminality of its own clergy folk. This seems a good point to mention also the arms of the Royal Faculty of Procurators of Glasgow, who practised in the bishop's courts.
Heraldry is represented in coats of arms relating to Glasgow with many common themes, well rehearsed by many other people, but it also provides us with future direction based on concepts such as flourishing and prosperity. Many of you will not be aware, for example, that a Lord Lyon today can follow a 1980s pop group, but I'm a great fan of ABBA. They are iconic and they are symbols of their own age. And in one of their musicals there is a line in a song which says, "There is no point in climbing a ladder if it's on the wrong wall." There's no point in climbing a ladder if it's on the wrong wall. Let me suggest to you that to understand the celebration of this festival today, you need to understand the science and art of heraldry by placing our ladder of understanding on the right wall and trying to make it understood as a subject within our own present day. Only if the ladder of heraldry is placed on the wall of Scottish history will we understand what modern and contemporary practice should be based on its historical significance. The earliest heraldry, we all know, seems to have emerged out of the 12th century. And we know that when William I was on the throne of Scotland, when he came to the throne in 1165, at the age of 22, he used his grandfather's arms, which were the lion rampant. He reigned for 49 years and created a sense of prosperity and development within our country and established many charters that founded very flourishing organisations and markets throughout Scotland. These are the foundations as Scotland became more prosperous and more outward looking that brought heraldry into the life of Scotland itself. William I was buried at the high altar in Arbroath Abbey, that same abbey which 700 plus years ago saw the birthplace of the Scottish nation with the signing of the Declaration of Arbroath.
Archbishop Robert Blackadder died in 1508 on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and with his death we enter the 16th century, a significant period of religious, civic and governmental unrest.
A place of great attraction is this Blackadder Isle, which sits on the south side of the cathedral. It's a fascinating space, and we really look forward to the day when it's open properly again. But this Blackadder Isle we believe was originally called the Fergus Isle. It's allegedly built over the place where Fergus, who would have been that mentor for Mungo, was originally buried. And as you enter the Blackadder Isle and look to the top, you see on the main boss there the image of Fergus's body on the cart that was pulled by 2 white oxen. One of the problems is that it's always had a flat roof, and one of the issues there is the water that ingresses through the roof. There is a bit of a story that goes with those who have worked on this area within the cathedral. We're currently in the process of trying to dry it out. The roof has been repaired. We've had dehumidifiers in there, I think, for a couple of years, and we're looking towards the day when it can be open and folk can enjoy it again. But it should have been called the Fergus Isle, and the little story goes among those who have worked in this area is that it's called the Weeping Isle because of the water that came through the roof. And I think the legend tells us that apparently Fergus did not want such a grand edification over the top of his burial place, and therefore it became the Weeping Isle. I don't know, some of these stories are more intriguing and fun than true and accurate, but the Weeping Isle, the Fergus Isle, the Blackadder Isle, it's all the same place.
Perhaps it was now that the Ecclesia Scoticana adopted as its emblem the burning bush, and from 1516 onwards, that the incorporated trades of Glasgow began to obtain their charters of incorporation or seals of cause, beginning with the Skinners. Now, the term seal of cause seems perhaps to derive from the words ad causas appearing on the seal used by the Royal Borough of Edinburgh when granting such charters. Similar seals may have been in use elsewhere, as we can see from one of the illustrations of the heraldry at the cathedral. The pre-Reformation seals of cause granted by the Borough Council will all have borne an additional seal of the bishop or archbishop as the feudal superior of the borough. I don't think they will necessarily have borne the magic words ad causas, and I seem to recall that in at least one case, the seal actually applied was referred to as the round seal. Throughout Scotland, most of these commercial guilds received their charters principally during the reigns of King James III, James IV, James V, Queen Mary, and King James VI. According to the Scottish Parliament and that law-making body, the Convention of Royal Boroughs, the councils of the Royal Boroughs were supposed to consist entirely of merchants, though this wasn't always the case, and in towns like Glasgow, which enjoyed many of the privileges of a royal borough before it actually became one, the merchants not only felt underrepresented, but lobbied the convention to take action on their behalf. The result was a series of royal arbitrations with King James as the oversman in places like Aberdeen and Edinburgh towards the end of the 16th century, and in Glasgow in 1604 to determine the individual structures of the local governments involved. This was very important because of the role they played in wages and prices control in their respective local authority areas. Now, this isn't the place to go into the details of that, but the Glasgow arbiters, which included some chaps from Edinburgh who were able to speak from experience, when they reported back early in 1605, it gave Glasgow a constitution which lasted until the great 19th century Reform Acts. In Glasgow, the city council was to be divided pretty well equally between the merchants and the craftsmen, but the provost was always to be a merchant with a casting vote. There was to be a single overarching guild for both merchants and craftsmen, headed by a dean or lord dean of guild, though the craftsmen were to have their own leader in the form of the regan convener of the trades. Both these personages were to be advised and assisted by their own councils and councillors, bodies which in due course became the merchant's house and the trades house. The guildry may have achieved its own distinctive mark in the cathedral heraldry with the later device of the trades house. The arms of the merchant's house as such are not illustrated in the cathedral, but the arms of most of the incorporated trades appear in the windows and elsewhere in the building. Not all the various guilds and societies ever established formal links with either the trades house or the merchant's house. For instance, we have in the cathedral the arms of the Glasgow Company of Fishmongers. This might be a good place to mention the Lord Lyon King of Arms Act of 1672 and the judicial role of the Lord Lyon. In terms of the Act, all heraldic bearings are supposed to be recognised by the Lion and recorded in the official government register of all arms and bearings in Scotland. Failure to do so can, in theory, result in all sorts of draconian outcomes, and since at least the 19th century, successive Lions have been encouraging bodies whose arms and bearings go back to before the Act to regularise the position. The Glasgow Incorporated Trades did this in the 20th century. A number of the Edinburgh crafts did so too, and those who didn't are now undertaking that task as a current exercise.
Alongside all this signs, symbols and colours emerged the office of the Lord Lyon, developing a central role within Scottish life, and it can trace back all the Lord Lyons to the time of Robert the Bruce in the 14th century. But many historians have traced the office back further than that, into the mists of Celtic history, to the royal or high Shenachie or royal poet, who was the keeper of the royal genealogy, which had to be narrated at the inauguration, later the coronation, of the King of Scots. The office of Lord Lyon is a very privileged one to hold, with great discretion that needs to be exercised appropriately. But it's now regulated by Acts of Parliament, and particularly the Lord Lyon King of Arms Act of 1867, which established in statute the office as the only King of Arms in Scotland, supported by heralds and pursuivants. The Lord Lyon became the head of the heraldic authority, the judge of the court of the Lord Lyon, and also responsibilities fell upon that office with regard to heraldic business throughout Scotland. Through the office, the garden of Scottish history has continued to grow through heraldry, continued by the cultivation, even today, of many of the signs and symbols that make up our heraldry in Scotland and in Glasgow. Heraldry of excellent organisations from the past but of today. For example, I was very privileged to grant to the City of Glasgow College a new coat of arms to represent its direction and its way forward. It was a joy and a delight for them to become part of the garden of Scottish history which heraldry makes up. The use of marks and symbols is ingrained into human life, and there's a real sense that they are about something beyond ourselves, about making our mark, something that everyone wants to do. Such symbols and particular coats of arms become part of our personal as well as our community legacy. They tell the story not only of historic Scotland, but of the living Scotland today, following in the great values and tradition that make us Scots. Along with the officers at arms of my court, we tried to keep alive these traditions today, and they are traditions that are very much visible within the life of Glasgow and also within your cathedral. The story belongs to all who are part of the living Scotland as they grow the garden of Scottish history, represented through the symbols, signs and colours of Scottish heraldry. This is what this festival celebrates today, And this is what we give thanks for within this festival, to be part of a living Scotland, cultivated in the garden of Scottish history. Enjoy, above all, enjoy the heraldry that's around about you. Don't get too worried about the technical side of it, or in fact what the rules and regulations are, but try to get it to tell you, in the depths of your heart, what it's all about through its signs, symbols, and its colours. And they are important things, because beyond them they represent greater concepts such as identification, belonging, and service. But above all, they represent the great work of human activity.
We began our discussions at the pulpit. As we know, that was an important part of the Reformation settlement in Glasgow. Preaching was a main part of the Reformed worship. And another part of the Reformation settlement was the nationalisation of church property. Although for centuries this seems not to have weighed with anyone vis-à-vis Glasgow Cathedral, since the 19th century the state has been more assertive, and it is now more clearly the case that the building is state property in the care of historic environment Scotland. These developments can be demonstrated through referring to the Georgian depiction of the royal arms bearing on an escutcheon the arms of the electorate or later kingdom of Hanover in the sacristy or vestry, and the chair of state which is kept there with the city arms on it, used by Queen Victoria when she visited the cathedral. People have continued to want to leave their mark in the cathedral. For instance, in the 19th century we have the arms of James Merry of Belladrum and Alexander Cunningham of Craigends and their joint enterprise, the Glengarnock Iron and Steel Company. This has been a fascinating tour through the cathedral, ladies and gentlemen, and I think that the Lord Lyon King of Arms and the Minister of Glasgow, the Reverend Mark Johnson, have given us a wonderful insight into the building's past, present, and indeed future. Thank you for participating in this evening's discussion.
Thank you very much, Gordon, for pulling all of that together. That was really very positive. Thank you. We now have the opportunity to move on to our question and answer session, and therefore I kind of want to throw it open to our just about 100 attendees that we've had present with us during this time. So it really is now over to yourselves if there are any questions. A couple of really positive comments from folks. Folks have enjoyed the organisation, the enthusiasm and the informative nature of what was present, and Rosalind has come back and said thank you for an interesting and informative talk. So thank you very much for that. Now I do have an other, and Ruth Maltman. Ruth, you have your hand up there. I wonder, could you, is that a question that you have for us, Ruth?
I think I clicked something.
Hi, Ruth, you're now kind of on the screen for us there. We can unmute you if you would like to say something.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Sorry, I clicked the wrong button, but I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Not at all, Ruth. Thank you very much. Thanks now. Now, Anne Love has come and has asked us, is there a book that would tell us more about what has been discussed today? Gordon, you might be able to help us with that in terms of some of the reference books you've looked at. I've got some that I can refer to, but maybe in the first instance, Gordon, yourself?
Well, there are a few books. Most of them will be consultable in the Glasgow room at the Mitchell Library. It's kind of difficult to know exactly where to begin because you need to cull all of this from lots of different places. With regard to the building of Glasgow Cathedral, Stephen Driscoll has written a very interesting book about that. Historic, I want to call it Historic Enterprise Scotland, but the Historic Environment Scotland have interesting things about that. The various books on heraldry, of which possibly the most accessible was written by Sir Ian Moncrieff of that ilk about 40 or 50 years ago. And indeed, Dr. David Bertie wrote a book quite recently about the arms of the bishops of Glasgow from earliest times. So there's quite a lot out there, but you need to do a bit of research in order to find it.
Yes. It's interesting, Gordon. I think one of the things that struck me over the last wee while is the amount of work that was done by, I think he was a one-time employee, but was lecturer at St Andrews University, and it's Richard Fawcett. Richard Fawcett has written quite extensively on the cathedral, very accessible, well illustrated, lots of photographs and illustrations, and really does take you through quite a lot of the iconography and imagery that there is within the cathedral, and manages in a sense to give it a historical context. So I hope that gives you some idea, Anne, of some of the places to look. We've got a thank you or a hello from Montreal from Ina Doyle. So Ina, I hope you've enjoyed the opportunity to share with us. It's been good to have you here. Are there any other questions? Let's just see. Someone's looking for a definitive catalogue of the signs and symbols and the ceilings of the nave and the choir. Now, it's interesting, I'll take a wee answer to that in the first instance, Gordon, then over to yourself. Colin, that there's a couple of things available. Some of the bosses that are in the choir area have been photographed and explained. And if you look at these bosses, rather than them being of heraldic symbolism, they are more to do with the life of Jesus. And we do have those available in the cathedral, again, once we're kind of back to normal. But really good photographs taken by a young photographer that we know, and comments from the biblical passages are attached to that. Again, Gordon, yourself, anywhere that you would see a definitive catalogue of the signs and symbols?
No, unfortunately, there isn't. in fact, we tried quite hard to find a way of identifying all of them as a result of the pictures that Colin took, and we've shared these with the Lord Lyon and with Edward Mallinson, the chairman of the Heraldry Society of Scotland. Edward has come back with a number of answers, and I believe that he's actually going to be writing a book about this. So it's something to look out for, although there isn't anything yet.
Yes. We've then an interesting one, and I think Catherine McLean asks this question. And again, it may be one that has a very straightforward answer, but I'm sure it's steeped in the richness of history. Catherine McLean asks us, why has the Glasgow Council kept the coat of arms on its bin lorries, etc.? I think we do see it on the bus stops, we see it on the litter bins, we see it on the lamp post just in front of the cathedral. I suppose it would be part of their imagery, but Gordon, any reason why bin lorries in particular?
I can see no reason why it wouldn't be. It's all part of putting your mark on things and establishing the ownership. And if you ever manage to get to go on holiday again, and particularly in countries like Italy and Spain, you can see all the municipalities are very proud of their armorial achievements, and they appear everywhere, including on their bin lorries and their lampposts and all the other places that Mark has just mentioned.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, Gordon, is that we see the iconography and the imagery of, you know, the Mungo and the crest coming through in contemporary renderings of some of these rather large murals and friezes on the ends of buildings. So we have in High Street, we've got St Mungo as you head south on High Street, and if you were to head north on High Street, you've got St Enoch with the baby in her arms. And, you know, so even there, some of these characters, independent of the heraldic symbols of the fish and the bear and the bird and the tree, even independent of that, we've got the motifs of St Mungo coming through again and again. Now, a well-kent face around the cathedral is Aileen Hunter, and Aileen has a question, and I would normally look to Aileen to answer some of my questions rather than ask them, but this might be more with yourself, Gordon, because I know that you have a kind of foot in both camps, and that you're in Glasgow, but you also spend time in Edinburgh. So Aileen asks, and she asks us, but I'm passing it to you. In years gone by, Glasgow Council was the merchants and trades. Was that the same in other cities? And the question would be, e.g. Edinburgh.
Yes, it very, very much was the case. And indeed, as I mentioned during the talk, the Convention of Royal Boroughs tried to establish that it was only merchants that were on the councils, particularly in the Royal Boroughs, but that hadn't always been the case. Now, Glasgow started out as an episcopal borough of barony, and basically the bishop could decide who was on the council, and through the various charters that he granted, it became certainly the case that the craftsmen were represented, and as I said, the merchants felt they were being underrepresented, and that's what led to the Letter of Gildry being issued in 1605. But effectively all the chartered towns of Europe had a mixture of merchants and craftsmen on the councils. Mostly it was merchants, and usually that led to such disputes that had to be settled by a superior authority in some way. And in Glasgow, by 1604 and 1605, it was the Crown through King James VI.
Again, for yourself and Colin, I'm conscious that Colin has been helping us facilitate most of this today. And Colin, you may be better placed to answer this, and I know you may not want to come on camera. We could answer, but Colin, you may have more of an insight. Did the diocese have a distinct arms from the City of Glasgow? Colin, I don't know how willing you are to kind of come on and speak to us.
Yeah, my voice. I wouldn't say so. I don't know many examples historically where, I mean, certainly, you know, the various coats of arms involved in London, and the Bishop of London was different. But I imagine it would always be the same elements, as Gordon well said in the talk. You know,
yes,
these elements of the fish, the tree, are constantly recycled with different Glasgow like the fishmongers and whatnot. They're all using the same elements, so it's almost like a chicken and the egg, who got there first, you know, for those symbols. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, having spent a wee bit of time in and around, and especially with the photographs that have been taken for this presentation, Jerry asks, Gordon, what are your own favourite depictions of the coat of arms, and where might we visit them in normal times?
Now that is a very that's a very interesting and leading question, Mark. You get all sorts of examples of the arms of Glasgow. One that particularly appeals in a modern representation, though it doesn't appeal to everybody, is on the tympanum of what used to be the library, now the Gallery of Modern Art, at the end of Ingram Street in Royal Exchange Place. But I would say that my own favourite probably are the arms of the Royal Borough of Glasgow, which we had up until regionalisation in 1975. I think they're exceptionally pleasing, and of course they're traditional. And one of the things that I've always found quite interesting since I was a young person is the motto of the City of Glasgow as appearing on the arms, which says, "Let Glasgow flourish." But of course, as you in particular will know, Mark, there's rather more to that, isn't there?
Yes, by the preaching of his words and the praising of his name. So yeah, that would be the additional strapline, I think, for the heraldry there. Gordon, I'm looking at a comment in a sense that's come in from Edward Mallinson, Edward John Mallinson, and I'm looking at this because again, Colin's got the technical wizardry there, and I don't know if Edward is still with us online, but the question or the statement was that Edward is in the process of producing a booklet on the heraldry in the cathedral
for the proposed visit of the Heraldry Society of Scotland, and this will take place once lockdown has ceased. Edward, your motif of a flying duck has just appeared, or a duck about to take flight has just appeared on our screens. Edward, would you like to tell us a wee bit about that work?
I've been involved with the Heraldry Society for the past 20 years, and each year the Society runs an excursion. We'd intended coming to the Cathedral in April of 2020, but all that was kind of curtailed as a result of the pandemic. And in preparation for that visit, I've been photographing virtually all the coats of arms that appear in the Cathedral and compiling them together in a booklet which gives the description of the arms and a little amount of information that I can glean on who the arms belong to, or in particular in some of the windows, who the arms do not belong to, because it's become apparent that although certain windows in the Cathedral are dedicated to individuals, the arms that appear in that window do not belong to the individuals concerned. Hopefully, in the next few months, when I can get back into the Cathedral to complete the work, the booklet will be produced. And I had intended, once it had been produced, offering it for the Friends of Glasgow Cathedral if they wanted to market it on their bookstore.
Right, very good, Edward. That's very good, and you know, as one of the folks involved with the Friends, I'd be keen to pursue that conversation. Again, even a snippet of that available online would probably be a bit of a tease for people to get them interested in some of the imagery that's there. Yeah, so I think we're probably getting towards the end of it. Thanks for your contribution, Edward. Probably getting towards the end of the presentation here. One little question that I saw jumping out at me there was, did Glasgow Trades House fund the windows in the Cathedral? It funded some, Gordon, but I don't think many folk could afford to fund all. Any comment on that?
Yes. As it happens, that's a particularly apposite window for the trades to have taken an interest in, because it is believed that that aperture was left blank longest by the masons constructing the cathedral to allow materials to be taken into the church and into the choir.
Yes.
The glass, of course, suffered considerably at the time of the Reformation and thereafter. And in the 19th century, a good place for glass was reckoned to be Munich. So an entire suite of glass from Munich was put into the church, which was taken out at the early part of the 20th century. And I think can now, well, it was kept for a while in a triforium, but I don't know where it is at the moment.
No, you're right. It's up there again, Gordon, and it now actually has been very carefully catalogued and preserved.
Oh,
I think for a while it unfortunately lay rather exposed on the rafters, but it's now in very, precisely manufactured drawed cabinets with styrofoam separating them, so you can, upon request, go to see some of that glass.
That's delightful. Well, to revert to the Trades House, the Trades House is a very interesting body. It's a kind of federal union of the 14 incorporated trades of Glasgow, who are actually its constituencies. And these constituencies elect the 64 members of the Trades House, which has a certain jurisdiction over all the others, but it's not a case that it has any real jurisdiction over them. It has, however, more funds than most of them do. In fact, about all the funds together of the 14 crafts just about equal the capital of the Trades House. And in the window that we're talking about here, you will see that there are 4 lancets and 2 circles and a crowning circle at the top. And in the top, you can see the arms of the Trades House, which were paid for by it, underneath that, the two most senior crafts, according to a court action raised by the hammermen in the 18th century. So that the hammermen and the tailors are the two premier crafts according to that, and then the others follow in various columns beneath, and you would see in the presentation the arms of the Incorporation of Gardeners in Glasgow, featuring Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And you might enjoy a little anecdote told by my father, who had been a Sunday school supervisor in Dunoon, where I grew up. And he had one day asked the participants in the Sunday school to draw a story from the Bible. And one little boy produced a Rolls Royce with two naked people in the back. It was one of these open tourers. And of course, my father was interested to discover what lay behind this. And this apparently was Adam and Eve being driven out of the Garden of Eden.
Quite literally driven out, eh? Well, do you know, I think I'm going to kind of, Gordon, again with your permission, I think I'll maybe kind of start to draw things to a close now. Gordon did mention the order in which the trades are represented, and I can still remember being at a meal where there was a discussion over whether they were listed properly in the running order of the evening, and I think you did refer to that said act at that point as well. A couple of things I think probably worth mentioning as trustees, Gordon, that there's a few things coming up. We've got the ecumenical service, which will be on tomorrow afternoon. That's June the 10th at 4 p.m. and that will be playing through the Glasgow Churches Together website. So I would encourage folks to be part of that. On the 12th of January, we've got Mungo's Bairns, and you can watch that live again on the Churches Together website. But there will be links through the Mungo Festival website as well for you to be able to just click and play. We've also got Mungo Legend of Glasgow Saint on the 12th, and that's at 6 p.m. And again, you can come to that through the St Mungo Festival 2021 website. There's coinage and coining on January the 13th, and you will remember that that would be the Saint's Feast Day, and I would encourage folks to come to that at 5:30. That's coinage and coining on January the 13th, and an archaeology of memory, and that's Scotland's early saints on June the 14th. So there's a catalogue of events that are coming up, and I hope that you'll be able to connect with some of them. That's all from me. Gordon, yourself?
I would just like to mention a word or two about the ecumenical service, because that really is how the Festival of St Mungo began, because it must be at least 20 years ago, maybe more, your predecessor, the very Reverend Dr. Bill Morris, who was a great friend to Glasgow and indeed to me, held, along with our co-trustee, Archbishop Mario Conti, an ecumenical service at just this point. And of course, it's great to remember that the 13th of January is in fact St Mungo's Day, and every year you hold a service in Glasgow Cathedral of an ecumenical basis at which everybody is welcome to attend. It usually is very well attended by all sorts of official and representative bodies, and I would commend that to everybody who's listening to come to next year, as well as online in a couple of days' time. Thank you, Mark. That's great.
Not at all. Gordon, thank you very much. I think that's probably our part of this presentation over. Colin has been in the background flicking the switches and making sure that we were heard when we needed to be heard. So thank you, Colin, for that. Thank you, Gordon, for the work, preparation and direction that you've given to this. And thank you all for attending today, for sharing in this part of St Mungo's Festival 2021. Take care, and I look forward to catching up with some of you in person in the future, but at least online in the not too distant days. God bless. Bye.